Hello and welcome to this section on Elastic Cloud Compute, or otherwise known as EC2. If you don't already know, EC2 is Amazon's main cloud compute platform, which provides virtual servers in the cloud. So for this lesson and most of this section, we're going to be learning about EC2 from an account and services layer perspective. So here, let's now dive into AWS our account here and select on the compute services. You will see that there are two compute services offered by AWS, or I should say there are two most common compute services, which is EC2, which is again the virtual server-based computing, and then also serverless computing, which is offered in the form of AWS Lambda, which we will touch on briefly later on in this course. But for now, let's move into EC2. Also over here in the console, let me jump into EC2 as well so we can follow along on the console with what we're talking about here in the Orion papers. In this particular lesson, we're going to touch on EC2 Essentials. However, I want to talk about exactly what's going on here in this diagram. So if you remember on the account and services layer, we're talking about how someone like the root user or AWS users can access and manage AWS services through IAM access policies. So that's why you still see IAM here, even though it is a bit transparent. I just want you to always remember that in order to access and manage any of these services that we're going to talk about, you do need to grant access via IAM access policies, just something that's very important to remember. Now you will see up here login authentication using a key pair. Now this is actually if we want to log into the EC2 instance after it has been created. And we do that and we get authenticated through key pairs, which is something that we are going to review as part of this section. But for now, let's jump back into EC2 Essentials, and there are buying options, shared responsibility, and placement group under the Essentials umbrella, but we will actually talk about those in separate lessons. For now, let's just concentrate on the Essentials and what exactly Amazon EC2 is. So, as I've stated previously, Amazon EC2 provides scalable virtual servers in the cloud. An EC2 virtual server is known as an instance and can be made up of different instance types and sizes. So you may have already heard me throughout some parts of this course just refer to things as instances, right? I'll be like, we provision an instance, or we can place an instance here, or we can terminate an instance. And generally when somebody just uses the term instance, they're referring to EC2 instances, although they can also refer to RDS instances, which is the database offering as well. But most commonly, it just means an EC2 instance. These virtual servers can run different operating systems, but most commonly run a flavor of Linux or Windows, and we'll go over those when we start to look into AMIs. In terms of instance configurations, it's just important to understand that EC2 instances have been designed to mimic traditional on-premise servers, but with the ability to be commissioned and decommissioned on demand for easy scalability and elasticity. So if you remember, we talked about the term scalability and elasticity, and what I just want to highlight here is that if you recall, if you have a traditional on-premise data center and you want to add a server, you will generally have to research what kind of server you want. You'll have to order it, wait for it to come in the mail, install it, load the operating system. That whole process may take days or weeks to accomplish. But with EC2, what allows it to be easy scalability and elasticity is that you can provision and launch an EC2 instance and have a server up and running for your needs, generally within seconds once you know how to do it. And you can use them for a few minutes, an hour, a week, a month, a year, and then decommission it or terminate it at any time, and you'll only pay for what you use. So now let's talk about some of the components or important components of an EC2 instance. So first we have an Amazon machine image, and this is basically where you're selecting the operating system for your server. There are a few other options in there as well, but primarily that's what you're choosing. You're choosing Linux, what type of distribution of Linux, or Windows, and what type of Windows operating system you want to load on. So when you think about Amazon machine images, think about the operating system. Then there's instance type. And what I want you to think about here is you're really choosing the underlying hardware or virtual hardware that's going to run your virtual server. So things like compute power, meaning the processor, RAM, network bandwidth, those types of things are what you're selecting when you're choosing the instance type. Then there is the network interface, and this is where we enable or set public or private IP addresses as well as elastic IP addresses, which is something we're going to talk about in more detail later on in this section. Also, you're going to select a storage type, meaning what is going to be the instance's hard drive. And currently, there are two main options that you can select from. One is Elastic Block Store, commonly referred to as EBS, which is network persistent storage. And then there's Instant Store, which is considered ephemeral storage. And there will be an entirely separate lesson on storage where we will dive deep into EBS and Instant Store and describe what I mean by those key points. So now let's talk about just some of the other key important facts that you need to know about EC2 as we move into this section. First is that a security group must be assigned to an instance during the creation process. So if we look over here in the EC2 console, we do see that there is a section here for security groups. So if I click on that, I can view the security groups that I currently created in my account. But if you remember, security groups are a part of the VPC security layer. However, each EC2 instance does have to be associated with a security group. So you can view them, manage them, and create them here, but when we go through the creation process of an EC2 instance, you will have to associate the instance with a security group. Also, each instance must be placed into an existing VPC availability zone and subnet. So if you remember back to our VPC diagram from the previous lesson, there is a VPC, which is in a region, and then within the VPC, there's availability zones, and within those subnets, and it's within each of those that we must place an EC2 instance. We cannot place an EC2 instance outside of an AWS VPC. We also have the ability for automated custom launch commands that can be passed into the instance during launch via user data script. So this is otherwise known as bootstrapping, and that's something, again, we're going to go into later on in this section. Also, tags can be used to help name and organize provision instances because sometimes things can get a little messy as we start to have a lot of instances running. And what we can do is we can add tags to help us sort and filter and organize all of our running instances. Also, there are encrypted key pairs which are used to manage login authentication. So that's what I mean when I was talking about here, these key pairs which are used to log actually into the instance once we have those provisioned. And also, and very importantly, there are limits on the amount of instances you can have running in any region at any particular time. So an important thing to know about EC2 and VPCs and some of the other services as well is that there are limits that are placed on how much we can have in our account at any given time or in a particular region at any given time. And if we click on limits here right under EC2 dashboard, we can view instance limits, host limits, EBS limits, network limits, and auto-scaling limits. And what's important to understand is that at any given time in one particular region, we can have a limit of 20 instances, on-demand instances, and we're going to get into on-demand and other buying options in the next lesson. But you can have 20 on-demand EC2 instances running at any particular time. And then even within that, there's different instance types, and there are certain limits on the instance types that you can have. Now, you may be saying, why are there these limits? Well, a couple of things. One is that AWS doesn't want somebody to create a new account, provision 10,000 EC2 instances, and then not be able to pay for them. So it's a way to manage someone's account to make sure that they're not overextending what they can pay for, but also it forces you to look at the way that you are architecting your application to make sure that you are choosing the right types of instances. Because if you have 20, let's say T2 micro instances running, and you then want to have a 21st T2 micro instance, perhaps maybe you're using the wrong instance type. Maybe you should use a larger instance type, like for example, a C4 extra large. And with that, then maybe instead of having to run 20 T2 micro instances, maybe with only 4 C4 extra large instances, you can handle the same workload. So it really forces you to think about and hopefully make your architecture more efficient as you are deploying applications in AWS. And of course, at any time, if you do need a limit increase, you can click here on any one of these links and submit a request to AWS to have the limits increased. And as a part of that, they will do a review on your account, but most likely you will be approved for any sort of an increase that you may need. So that's just a quick overview of EC2 Essentials. And in the next lesson, we're going to move in and talk about buying options. But for now, we will conclude this lesson. Thank you for watching. You may now move on.